Ma'am, would you like to briefly introduce the session,
Okay.
talk a
Good
little about the
afternoon.
agenda?
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you AIOS for giving us this platform. I welcome you all, and Professor J.C. Das, Dr. Manavdeep Singh, Dr. Vibhuti Sinha, Dr. Mayuri Khambar, Dr. Vinita, and I think we don't have Dr. Sagarika as yet. And a very warm welcome to Dr. Shamira. It's a pleasure to have you here. This instruction course is about the managing the complications of filtering surgery, the trabeculectomy. And I think all of us would agree that trabeculectomy is a surgery which is performed not only by the glaucoma specialist, but also by the general ophthalmologists. It looks like a very simple surgery, but we all know that it has plethora of early and late complications. And this is what this instruction course aims to talk about, that how do we manage and how do we minimize these complications. And before we begin our instruction course, it's a pleasure to hear Dr. Shamira, who will be talking about the Ahmed glaucoma valve. He is a glaucoma surgeon and a very known faculty at the Singapore Eye Center, I think. And let's hear it from Dr. Shamira now.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. We can go straight away to the video, please.
It's incredible to think that some of the first attempts at developing a glaucoma drainage implant were published as early as 1906. We've come a long way since then and learned much about the factors influencing surgical success and complication rates related to GDIs. In this video, we discuss our experience with the Ahmed glaucoma valve, or AGV, in Asian eyes and describe practical modifications in the surgical technique. While most tubes are placed in the anterior chamber, there's growing evidence that these have a significantly higher rate of endothelial cell loss compared to tubes implanted in the sulcus. Thus, the placement of sulcus tubes is increasingly not only preferred for eyes at risk of corneal decompensation, but also gaining popularity in more routine cases, as it almost eliminates the risk of tube endothelial touch. Traditionally, the AGV is placed under a patch graft or a scleral flap to prevent tube erosion. Here, you can see the creation of a 90% thickness scleral flap. A 25-gauge needle is used to create a sclerostomy 2 mm behind the limbus under the scleral flap, and the beveled tube is then advanced into the sulcus, in this instance using a 29-gauge needle as a stylet. The Aravind group described a no-patch 4 mm scleral tunnel technique which had no tube exposures at 2 years in both adult and pediatric patients. A Mexican study with a longer follow-up of 8 years in 128 children who were implanted with AGVs using the same technique also reported no tube extrusions. Simply, a 23-gauge needle initiates a tunnel track starting from 4 mm behind the limbus and 2 mm lateral to the radial direction of the tube. The needle is advanced through partial thickness sclera for the first 2 mm until the entire bevel of the needle is covered. Then, the needle is dipped to enter the sulcus. These standardized measurements allow for a more precise and predictable tunnel creation every time. A highly beveled tube is then inserted into the tunnel and into the sulcus. We aim to leave the tube just visible in the primary position, or barely there, so it is only visible from a sideways view. Worries about getting the length of the tube in the sulcus just right can be circumvented by adjusting the desired extent and suturing any excess tube flat against the sclera. With this technique, tissue trauma is minimized, and gently curving the path of the sutured portion of the tube protects against vaulting, thereby reducing risk of erosion. Barely there sulcus tubes are especially easy to achieve when the pupil is larger and not as mobile. This is because a longer tube length in the sulcus can cause it to vault up, predisposing to iris incarceration or pigment chafing. Should a tube become occluded by the iris, an uncommon event, it can effectively be treated by laser iridotomy. To aid conjunctival closure, we advise marking the conjunctival opening at the start of the surgery. This simple step ensures perfect reapposition of the conjunctiva with no more guesswork, helping to guard against an untidy, uneven closure with a risk of retraction. Postoperative scarring remains a critical determinant of long-term bleb survival. Antimetabolites such as mitomycin C can be injected intraoperatively to modulate fibrosis, but it's also associated with non-specific cytotoxic and potentially severe complications such as bleb leak and conjunctival erosion over the tube. While our group's Cochrane review found intraoperative mitomycin C did not provide any benefits for the success of aqueous shunt surgery, most of the studies were conducted in Caucasian eyes. There may be a case for its use in eyes with higher risk of scarring, such as in pigmented races. At the 3-year follow-up, our local case control series of AGV with and without MMC found that after a single intraoperative injection of intratenone's MMC, 0.2 milligrams per ml, patients were twice as likely to be completely off topical glaucoma medications and also half as likely to be on 4 drops. There was also a significant reduction in the number of post-op glaucoma medications. No extrusions or infections in the group with MMC were reported, while there were some exposures in the group without MMC. These findings are similar to those from multi-center prospective double-mask RCT, the AHMED with MMC comparative trial. This showed that intra- and post-operative MMC resulted in better IOP control during the time period most vulnerable to a hypertensive phase, and cases required fewer glaucoma drops for IOP control at 12 months. In summary, we described several modifications to GDD surgical technique which have improved our surgical success and minimized complications. This includes marking the edge of the conjunctival opening at the start of surgery, use of a 4 mm long intrascleral tunnel, suturing down the excess tube length, sulcus tube placement where possible, and intratenone's MMC injection. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present those. These are just little tips that we've learnt along the last 10, 15 years of doing these glaucoma valves. And I thought they would be useful to some of our colleagues in the region. Some of them you may have used already. In fact, the one we most recently used was the Arvind technique for putting our tubes in, and it stood us in good stead along the way. So thank you very much for the transfer of knowledge.
Thank you, Dr. Shamira. Just one question, what is your take on the comparison of the posterior segment complications in the posteriorly placed tube versus if you place the tube in the anterior segment, what are the additional complications or the risks that you encounter?
Right, so you can potentially, because you're going through ciliary body, you can get some bleeding. That's more likely when you put it in through the sulcus, okay? But you're far less likely to get any problems with erosion, and the angulation is very, very nice for the sulcus, so that there's less of the vaulting. So we've noticed some huge improvements in some of our complications. The other risks, I suppose, are blockage of iris, but you can get around that by either putting the bevel face down. That's one thing you can do. Or the other thing you can do is, if there is some blockage, you can simply yag it with a laser and it comes free and there's a return of flow.
And thank you so much, Dr. Shamira.
Can I ask a single question? Dr. Shamira, excellent. I've been doing glaucoma surgery in glaucoma AGVs in India for quite some time. There are 2-3 points I'd like to highlight. One is endothelial damage. I have not seen many cases of endothelial damage, provided you have put the tube right parallel to the iris surface. It extends only 2 to 3 millimeters into the antechamber and is securely anchored. In that case, the endothelial damage is practically non-existent. Most bothering problem is the tube extrusion, and the tube extrusion is probably the most important complication. And normally it happens not immediately, maybe 2 to 3 years or 4 years after the surgery is done. I had a great discussion with Dr. Ahmed, and I had suggested that why not to put the tube under the body of the tube, why to put it over it. The moment you put it over it, it is causing more of vaulting, and the vaulting site is giving rise to the erosion of the conjunctiva and resulting in the extrusion. So I suggested to him that why not to put the tube in the undersurface of the body so that the vaulting is minimized. He appreciated, but he said that the practical difficulty to put the tube under the flap, under the body of the AGV. That is because the AGV, the valve is present under surface. We can't put it there. We have to put it because the stretching of the membrane is under the surface of this thing. So that way it has to be put over the. That's why that problem could not be eliminated in design part of it. But I also suggested when I put the valve 9 millimeters posterior to the valve, to the limbus, I think the vaulting is minimized and the extrusion is much less common. So if you take these few tips, I think we have minimized the tube extrusion as well. But routinely, I do a trap and make a gutter sort of thing on the deeper sclera to accommodate the tube into it and anchor it at the end, and it works very well.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful tips, and thank you, Shamira. I think Zubi will move on to the actual instruction course now. And before we start the instruction course, I would again like to formally welcome Professor J.C. Das, who needs no introduction. And sir is one of the most senior glaucoma surgeon of the country at present, who's actually practicing, and he's a father figure in the field of glaucoma. And he has been the head of Guru Nanak Eye Center, Maulana Azad Medical College, and has been heading the glaucoma services at Shroff Eye Center. And he's been the past president of GSI. And sir is going to give us a brief introduction about the instruction course. So please.
Thank you, Dr. Parul, for the kind introduction and making me part of this instruction course. And I was going through the names and the topics. It seems that this instruction course has been designed very planly way, and you are very carefully selected the very important topics, and you have also chosen the excellent speakers who have put on long years of practice, and they all do the glaucoma practice for many years to contribute to their experience and share their experience to us. To give a bit little layout of the topics, I would like to each aspect of this surgery is very, very important. Just surgery is just a single part, but I can tell you the trabeculectomy is not the end of the problem. And many people say it's the beginning of the problem. If you keep this thing in mind, that doing the surgery may not be that difficult for you because you have been doing it for a long time. But doing a trab is the starting point of the trouble in the glaucoma management. So keep that thing in mind. If you keep that thing in mind, then of course you take every bit of the care, starting from the case selection, which one to choose, which surgery for which type of glaucoma, staging of the glaucoma and all that. You take all the precautions preoperatively, intraoperatively, and postoperatively, and the control of intraocular pressure preoperatively, stopping certain drugs which will cause bleeding on the table, which will cause change in the blood aqueous barrier and will cause more of inflammation. And you must see that the drugs which will increase rather decrease the wound healing also avoided for little time. So preparing the conjunctival bed for little time, maybe a few days before the surgery, giving the steroid drops might help. But the intraocular part, intraoperative part is extremely, extremely important. But one thing you must keep in mind, hypotony is the mother of all the troubles preoperatively and the intraoperatively and postoperatively. You must see that at no point of time hypotony is created during surgery and after surgery. The way to prevent is to see that the antechamber is not flattened up, even during surgery. Forming the antechamber after the end of the surgery has no values. Why that is important is the moment the antechamber is flat and there is hypotony, there is immediate choroidal expansion. And the moment choroidal expansion is, choroid is normally 480 microliters in volume, and the antechamber has got only 150 microliters in volume. So a little bit of expansion, maybe 20% expansion of the choroid is enough to eliminate the antechamber by 2/3. So if you keep that thing in mind, at no point of time during your surgery or even after this surgery, antechamber should not be allowed to flatten up. That means you can avoid hypotony and all the further complications of hypotony. That is something which has to be kept in mind. And Post-operative follow-up again is extremely important, and age-old teaching is always also true for this case. The prevention is better than the management post-operatively. And for a persistent increased intraocular pressure on the post-operative period, I must tell you three very, very important and practical points that we sometimes forget about the steroid response, because we are giving steroid for a little higher dose for little time. And surprisingly, especially in young patients, the steroid response is too high, and it happens even in few days' time. So the steroid response has to be kept in mind. Keep in mind the second aspect, that the resistance to a drug. The pressure is high post-operatively, and you have started medications, and in fact, some medications may not be working. So you must keep the resistance of the drug in mind. Third thing, you must keep in mind the hypersensitivity reaction to a drug. That means drug is acting paradoxically, is increasing intraocular pressure, causing the swallowing that the chamber. For example, the dorzolamide in form of systemic, given in systemic form, otherwise in the local form, is a notorious drug, I can tell you. Will be causing intraocular pressure, will increasing the depth of the chamber problem. It causes swallowing that chamber. So be aware of all these medication, all these aspects in the post-operative time. Thank you. Thank you very much, Parul. I think we'll go ahead with the topics now.
Thank you,
Over to you.
Professor JC Das. Thank you, Professor JC Das. And our first topic talk in today's instruction course is by Dr. Vinita. Dr. Vinita is heading the glaucoma unit at the AIIMS Rishikesh. She's a graduate from Maulana Azad. She's a dynamic surgeon, and she is being invited as speaker and at many national and international conferences. And she's going to talk about, did I make the right choice, choosing the right surgery? Dr. Vinita, you can start the slide share, please.
Yeah. So are my slides visible?
Yeah, you are visible and audible.
Yeah. And are they changing? Because in the last session, they were not changing. Are they changing?
You can just move on to the second slide, then we'll know.
Yeah, I moved on to the second slide.
No,
It's not changing.
Not changing.
Not
So then
changing.
I'll not go in the slideshow. I'll go in the other.
Ma'am, just make it full screen and single click on your screen. Then
It's not
after,
happening. The same thing happened in the last session also.
just make it full screen, ma'am.
Yeah, I made it full screen.
Okay, just single click on your screen.
Okay.
Now move your slides.
Is it changing now? I've come to my second slide.
no.
It's better. We won't waste time. I'll go like this
Okay.
only.
Okay.
Yeah. So the question is, did I make the right choice? So choosing the right surgery in a patient with glaucoma, we have an armamentarium of various options available to us, as we have an armamentarium of oils available for a cataract surgeon. So we have trabeculectomy to tube shunts to microinvasive or minimally invasive glaucoma surgeries and satellite-destructive procedures. But we should be choosing the surgery which is ideal for a person, as in is ideal for that particular person of patient of glaucoma. So when do we normally plan a surgical intervention? It is when the medical and the laser intervention has failed, or the patient is non-compliant to medications, or is he having serious drug side effects, the cost has become an issue for him, and the target IOP is not being achieved. And sometimes as a primary treatment also, it could be offered to some patients who do not want to use drugs. Remember, for each patient, we have to do a risk and benefit analysis on a case-to-case basis, considering his structural and functional integrity of his glaucomatous damage and the progression of his glaucomatous optic neuropathy. So primary goal of any surgery in glaucoma is having minimal complications with a good long-term intraocular pressure control, reaching the target IOP and avoidance of visual impairment. So factors which are to be taken into consideration when we have to plan out a surgery are certain objective criteria and certain subjective criteria. So what are the objective criteria? These are the type of glaucoma the patient has, whether it is a primary surgery or a repeat surgery, what is the status of his conjunctiva? Is it a touched conjunctiva or a late conjunctiva? Or is it already a scarred conjunctiva? Are we planning a combined cataract surgery in the patient? What is the risk of complication of each type of surgery for that patient? What is the risk of progression depending on his target IOP which we are aiming? While the subjective factors are what is the surgeon's own comfort level in doing a particular type of surgery, What is the age and the life expectancy of the patient? What is the visual prognosis of the patient? What is his quality of life has to be taken into account. And all these things need to be discussed with the patient. So an ideal glaucoma procedure should be one which is fast, easy, with a low cost, repeatable, and with less complications, giving us intraocular pressure control, which is predictable and reproducible, and with the least of circadian variations, with no need of adjunctive medications, and a long-term success. So why is it so difficult to make a decision in this regard? This is because glaucoma surgery is not as straightforward as a cataract surgery. Even when surgery goes well, the post-operative period is fraught with complications and patient complaints. Patient may come up and say he's not seeing better, he's seeing worse. Transient vision loss is common. Patients may be uncomfortable after the surgery. Their eyes may be irritated, they may be having redness. Patients also do not understand the need for surgery, provided in most of the cases, as we know in glaucoma, it is an asymptomatic loss of visual fields. Also, the risk of surgery, depending on the type of surgery which we have chosen, are pretty high, especially vision-threatening complications, which may necessitate us to take trips back to the operating room. Trabeculectomy is the first surgery which is the gold standard for glaucoma, with a high success rate, a better control on diurnal variation, and recently the modifications have improved our results of trabeculectomies. Using the COS technique, which are all these modifications which have been suggested by COS from Moofield's safe surgery technique, it has been seen that the primary trabeculectomy achieves an IOP of almost less than 18 millimeters of mercury in about 90% of the eyes, and with infrequent post-op complications. But the conflict which arises is, should we be using any antifibrotics, antimetabolites, and should we be doing a cataract trabeculectomy alone or with a cataract surgery? As we all know, the main cause of failure of a trabeculectomy is a fibroblastic proliferation causing subconjunctival and episcleral fibrosis. So the modifications have been done so as to prevent this scarring, and these could be antimetabolites, amniotic membrane transplantations, or use of collagen implants. Various studies have shown that the failure rate of trabeculectomy reduces dramatically when we are using antifibrotic agents, which could be mitomycin C or 5-FU. And amongst the two, it has been seen that mitomycin C is more commonly used as an adjunct because of its superiority over 5-FU. And how do we assess in which patients we need to use? So based on the assessment of the risk factors, which are the patient factors and the ocular factors, and based on the risk of post-operative infection, based again upon the patient and the systemic risk factors and the ocular risk factors, we have classified the patients as low risk, intermediate risk, and high risk for the use of antifibrotic agents. And those with the high risk, we will prefer to use a higher concentration of mitomycin C and a higher intraoperative time for the use of mitomycin C. Based again on the risk of infection, we may consider avoiding use of antimetabolites in high risk groups, which are at the high risk of developing infections, especially those who are immunocompromised. Again, even with the use of antimetabolites, we may land up with these problems. These are the woes of antimetabolites: overhanging, overweeping, filtering blood. So other modifications were suggested and are being used. These are the use of amniotic membrane augmented trabeculectomy, which uses the properties of amniotic membrane as an antifibrogenic agent. And there are various studies which have shown that AMT augmented trabeculectomies not only increases the probability of diffusely elevated blood, but it with a low vascularity, and also it keeps the overlying conjunctiva healthier with fewer post-op interventions and lesser time taken for the surgery. So it can be routinely incorporated in your routine surgical steps. It is easily available as a dried AMT, and so it can be used either as a primary procedure or as an additive with mitomycin C, with either in the subconjunctival or in the subciliation with the anchoring sutures. Another substance which is being used is the Ologen, which are the collagen implants, which are biodegradable. And again, there are multiple meta-analyses and systematic reviews which have shown that the efficacy is similar to that of the MMCs. And however, it does not offer any significant advantages as compared to MMC. Then we also had this express shunt, but the use of express shunt is not in vogue because of its cost factor and also because of the paucity of high quality studies with it. Then we have the tube shunts, which are again a common surgical alternative used in various complicated glaucomas. Which valve to use? Again, various studies have used Ahmed valve or Wehrwelt valve. And now the choice will depend upon whether we want an immediate IOP control in the immediate post-operative period, or we can delay the IOP control. But what after a failed trabeculectomy? So what should we be doing? Another similar surgery or a different surgery? The TVT study said that there's a much higher success rate with a tube shunt. It also said that the probability of failure was less. And the incidence of post-op complications was also less as compared to TAV with MMCs. So if my primary choice is a trabeculectomy, my second choice would be a trabeculectomy in an uncomplicated case and maybe bleb revisions if required. But if my retrap phase, then I'll have no choice but to go to the tubes. Although doing it as a primary tube surgery, the decision is that it is like a dead end, because compared to trabeculectomy, particularly if I'm doing it in younger patients who requires a sequence of operations over the lifespan, doing a repeat tube may not be as easy. In combination with cataract, these are just 2-3 slides more on cataract. So whether we do need to do a cataract surgery alone, it has been seen in studies that cataract surgery alone in early cases may reduce the IOP by 2 to 4 meters of mercury. However, it is being used more commonly with mix as a procedure, as a cataract plus procedure, where we're combining with canaloplasty, trabeculotomes, and eye stents, piggybacked on phacoemulsifications. And although the success of the combined surgery is usually not as favorable as filtration surgery alone, it can also be combined with trabeculectomies in the cases where the IOP target is not in the low teens or in the single digit. And then the last work on cyclodestructive procedures, where we are now using MicroPrus transcranial cyclophotoablation has come up in the market, where it is being used in refractive glaucomas as an alternative to surgeries in elderly patients who are not keen on surgeries, who have poor compliance, and who have a poor tolerance to medications. So again, multiple reports are there which are showing that the mean IOP decrease with MicroPulse cyclophotoablation is pretty good, and it can be used as a procedure before resorting to other methods in normal circumstances as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vinita, for covering it wonderfully. And I think once we have decided that what surgery we are going in for, we have to carefully assess the patients in the preoperative and do a good surgery, and then take care of them post-operatively. And this is what I'm going to talk about in my presentation. Let me start the slide share. Is my presentation visible?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so good evening to you once again, and I will be talking about that how do we prevent complications and take care of our patients starting from the preoperative period to the intraoperative period and to the postoperative period. And as Dr. JC Das very correctly said, that the problem begins once you have done a TRAB, So till the time you're planning to do a surgery, it's easier, but once you have done a TRAB, you have to manage a number of things, the patient's comfort and the complications. So as glaucoma surgeon, I think all of us are in the pursuit of a nice filtering bleb with good intraocular pressure, which looks something like this. And what our patients want is good vision with minimum medication and a comfortable eye. We all are very well aware of all these complications which we frequently encounter, which could be early post-operative, like the shallow anterior chamber, hypotony, late complications like a failing bleb, infection. And these complications are very commonly seen after trabeculectomy. So a key to long-term successful outcome of trabeculectomy is a very careful preoperative assessment and planning, execution of each step with utmost care, and meticulous early postoperative care and follow-up. So whenever we decide that we are going to operate upon a patient for a filtering surgery, there are a lot of ocular factors that we have to look into. And all of us want a pristine, untouched cornea. But many a time patient has had secondary glaucomas, and they have the retinal surgeries have been done, pterygium surgeries have been done, they have prior filters, and all these eyes can have adherent conjunctiva, which leads to a difficult conjunctival dissection and aggressive wound healing. So these are the cases where you would like to use an antimitotic agent. On the other hand, you can have thin and inflamed conjunctiva because of long-term use of anti-glaucoma drugs, and there is a risk of buttonholing in these cases. So before you are taking up the patient for surgery, it's a good idea that you check the mobility of the conjunctiva preoperative in the OPD, and also on the table that which area you are going to make your filter at. Now, again, ocular surface is very, very important because most of these patients are on long-term anti-glaucoma medication, which can lead to a lot of ocular surface disorder in form of blepharitis, dry eyes, and it's always a good idea to put the patient on drug holiday if possible. You can stop prostaglandin analogs or drugs like pilocarpine or maybe Ripadex, which we have recently started using 1 week before surgery. Put the patient on copious lubricant so that we have a good ocular surface. And sometimes we also like to put the patient on low dose steroids, maybe a week or two prior to surgery to have a better uninflamed ocular surface. Now, again, knowing if the patient is very high myope is very, very important, because in high myope patients, you have thin sclera, so you should avoid using anti-metabolite agents. One can go in for Ologen implants, try to go in for thicker flaps. And on the other hand, if you have a hyperope in which you have to do a filtering surgery, you have to be careful that they have higher incidence of shallow anterior chamber post-operatively. More of hypotony is expected, and therefore it's a good idea to atropinize these patients at the end of the surgery and aim for a meticulous conjunctival and the scleral flap closure. Now, again, knowing if the patient is diabetic and what is the systemic status of patient is very important, because diabetics, we all know that they have very high level of VEGF, which can lead to aggressive scarring and poor healing, and they are more prone to develop infections also. Now, again, if patient is on anticoagulants, stop the anticoagulants a couple of days before surgery so that the bleeding is minimized, and the post-operative suture removal, either in form of laser suturolysis or releasable suture, becomes much more easier. Now, once we have taken the preoperative care and we take the patient into the operation theater, it is very important to have the maximum possible exposure. Almost 8 to 10 millimeters of exposure is what we aim for, so that we have a good area, especially if you are going in for a valve surgery. You can use either a bridle suture or a corneal traction suture, whichever you are comfortable with. But with corneal traction suture, be careful that it should not be a full thickness, it should not enter into the anterior chamber, or it should not have a superficial bite which can lead to cheese wiring, and avoid too big a bite because this can also lead to distortion of the scleral flap. Now, conjunctiva, we all know, is a sacred tissue and it has to be handled very, very carefully. One has to be very gentle with the conjunctiva. Avoid any kind of sharp instruments so that you avoid buttonholing. Use plain serrated instruments. Whenever possible, one can hold the tenons, which gives you a better exposure, and do a sufficient size peritomy, not too big, not too small. And whenever possible, one should avoid the nasal flaps because they can give rise to more of dysesthesia in the post-operative period. Now, many times you plan to do a tenectomy. I don't prefer to do it. If you have tenons, achieve a good complete dissection of the tenons, because left tenon can interfere with the proper scleral flap dissection and also suture removal in the post-operative phase. And one can always use the tenons to hold, avoiding holding the conjunctiva directly. Now, once you've made the conjunctival flap, there are a lot of bleeders. You can leave them for some time. Many of them stop on their own. Otherwise, you can do a gentle cautery. Don't go in for very aggressive cautery. This can lead to a lot of scleral thinning. Now, anti-metabolite application is very important and has kind of become a routine in glaucoma surgeries. You have to decide the time and the concentration of mitomycin C beforehand. Make the area of application as big as possible, as posterior as possible. Use multiple sponges. Irrigate very nicely at the end of surgery, so end of application, so that you don't have any residual mitomycin. And be careful, it should not enter into the anterior chamber if you are doing a combined surgery. Now, choosing a scleral flap, whether you want to do a triangular or a rectangular, is a personal choice. Avoid too thin or too thick a flap. Now, whenever you are trying to do a sclerostomy, as Dr. Das very clearly mentioned, it is very, very important that at no point in time you should try and lose the anterior chamber. Maintain the anterior chamber, maintain the desired pressure so that the eye does not become hypotenuse and there is no choroidal effusion on the table. So pre-place a side port, pre-place an apical suture once you have made a scleral flap and before you are doing a sclerostomy. Do not go in for a very small or very big sclerostomy. Using Vanas or Trifine is your choice, and reform the anterior chamber with BSS or viscoelastic if you wish. Now, it's an unsaid rule that the trabeculectomy blebs, which are sealed well, they heal well, and they swell well. So suturing is the most crucial part of trabeculectomy. We should always check for the paracentesis and the traction side for any leak. And once they have been sealed, you should titrate your scleral port side port and achieve for a watertight suture closure. Now, conjunctival repair can be done using a running suture in a fornix in a limbus based flap or interrupted sutures on a fornix based flap. But please repair on all the wound leaks and buttonhole on the surgery, and one can use the fluorescent to check for the leaks. I usually put atropine at the end of my surgery so that you have a relaxed iris at the end of the surgery. Put the patients on steroids, and usually you need to put them on steroids for up to 3 months so that you have less of blood failures. Again, sutures, you can do a suture removal using laser, or you can put a releasable suture depending on what you are good at. The suture removal can be started from 3 days to 2 weeks in case if you have augmented your trabeculectomy with the anti-metabolite agents. And it's always a good idea to teach our patients about this digital massage, which is a very simple technique which they can be taught 4 times in a day, 5 to seconds each, which can help us to maintain the long-term success rate of trabeculectomy. So at the end, I would like to say that careful pre-planning, tailor-made decisions at every step, meticulous surgical step, each and every step is important, and a diligent post-operative care can lead to a long-term successful trabeculectomy. Thank you so much. And I think after my talk, I would like to invite Dr. Manavdeep Singh, and Dr. Manavdeep Singh is head of the department at RML Hospital. He's also the Joint Secretary of GSI and the Library Officer of Delhi Ophthalmic Society. And Dr. Manavdeep is an excellent teacher, and he recently published a very useful lecture series on glaucoma. And today he will be talking about management of post-operative shallow anterior chamber. Dr. Manavdeep.
Thank you, Parul, for this kind introduction. And is my slide visible? First slide?
Yes, yes. Yes, it's visible, Dr. Manavdeep.
So go to slideshow. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I have no financial interest. When a young cataract surgeon thinks of glaucoma, he certainly feels that why should I not do surgery? And he feels surgery. But glaucoma surgery has its own complications. The moment he sees AC flat on day 1, he starts looking like this and starts contacting his seniors. So why flat AC is so scary? It is because of 2 main things: a leak and a malignant glaucoma fear. So what is an ideal post-operative day 1 or day 2 appearance? Slightly shallow AC, IOP 6 to 10, no leak, no irritating sutures, no touch, no hyphema, well-formed bleb, and a visible PI. So this is the appearance of early and late ideal cases. So post-trap flat AC, the causes can be with elevated IOP or without elevated IOP, with low IOP. The ciliary block glaucoma is with elevated IOP is the most dangerous. Suprachoroidal hemorrhage is very rare. Retained visco can occasionally be a cause of slightly on the higher side of IOP. With low IOP, it's the overfiltration, wound leak, choroidal detachment, and aqueous hyposecretion, which can be because of inflammation, ciliary body detachment, cyclodialysis, and the use of aqueous suppressants, as Dr. Das told in the beginning. So first and foremost is the flat AC with low IOP. The confirmation of diagnosis is possible by UBM, but we mostly don't do it in the early post-operative period. The incidence is increased because of antifibrotic agents and is decreased because of releasable sutures, both of which are now becoming common. So the 3 grades have been described. Grade 1 is when there is a peripheral iridocorneal touch. Grade 2 when there is a sphincter touch. Both these are generally managed conservatively, and grade 3 is an iridolenticular or vitreous touch, which is a surgical emergency, and you can't even wait for the patient to be taken to the OT. You have to write then and there wherever you see this patient. So it can lead to, this is why it is such a big emergency. It is because it can lead to cataract formation, anterior and posterior synechial formation, as well as endothelial cell decompensation in hours, not in days. So the treatment is AC reformation with air in case of leak and viscoelastic in case of overfiltration. Because overfiltration, needs more time to settle, and if there is a leak, if you put viscoelastic, then the healing will not take place. And this is to be done right in the clinic itself. And resuturing and further management is possible only when the OT and the surgeon are available for that purpose. And this is a case of bleb leak, which you can see that here is IOP is generally very, very low, and AC may be flat or shallow, and the bleb is shallow or flat. The diagnosis is confirmed by Seidel test, which you have just now seen in the video. And the moisture flow strip is applied here in the area of suspected DEET, and flow of aqueous can be seen as a grain flow in the blue light. The site is generally a conjunctival suture or an area of conjunctival buttonhole. The treatment, we start with a conservative treatment by use of stopping the steroids, starting gentamicin, strong cycloplegia, pad and bandage, large bandage contact lens, autologous blood, so on and so forth. So many other things have also been tried. The definite treatment may be by laser or by surgery. In laser, we can use a purse string sort of a system, and we can use large spots, and we can. But before using this argon laser, we have to use a dye, because otherwise the energy will not be taken up. The suture removal sometimes can be helpful, because there can be a suture which is the cause of the trouble and is the cause of leakage, and you remove the suture and leakage stops after a pad and bandage for 24 hours. Most commonly, it requires resuturing, or sometimes the distal edge of the conjunctiva has retracted. So for this, we remove the corneal epithelium before suturing it to cornea, otherwise the healing will not take place. It may require lens removal if the cataract has already formed and the shallowness persists. So this is a case of rapidly formed cataract because of hydrolenticular touch. The problems related to bleb leak include bleb failure by multiple means, which I shall not go into details because of paucity of time. And all these things ultimately lead to trabeculectomy. The hypotonic maculopathy is common more often with overfiltration if it persists for long, and the risk of infection is always there in a case of leak and leading to endophthalmitis. This is autologous blood injection as one of the treatments for overfiltration. Hypotony due to overfiltration, here the bleb is highly raised and not flat. In bleb leak, the bleb is flat. So this is the difference, and relatively innocuous and settles on its own in a few days or weeks. And make sure there is no leak, because there may be a leak somewhere else and there is a cyst formation somewhere else. And it can cause significant hypotonic maculopathy if it remains for long. Generally, it happens if it remains for a few months. Hypotonic maculopathy is more common in this, and grade 3 shallowness is, however, very rare. So this is a case of overfiltration showing a large bleb and a relatively shallow AC. The management is mostly conservative and stabilization of the black aqueous barrier by using cycloplegia at steroids, may need intracameral use of viscoelastic, and may require Palmberg sutures. And argon laser photocoagulation from the sides can be done if the extent of bleb is more than 3 to 4 o'clocks. And if not the surgical tightening, if none of these things help, then you have to do the tightening of the scleral flap, which may lead to ultimately again the filtration failure. This is a Palmberg suture, and which you can see the books to understand how it is done. The ciliary choroidal detachment is the third most common cause, and it may be a cause, but more likely as an effect of hypotony. Even if intraoperative hypotony of 10-15 seconds can lead to ciliary detachment and shallow AC postoperatively. It may be subtle and hardly visible even on UBM, to an extent of kissing choroidal. So extent can be wide. The reduced visual acuity may be an early sign and generally settles on its own with a conservative treatment with cycloplegia. If it does not settle in 2 weeks, then AC reformation is required. Flat AC with elevated IOP, the causes are generally pupil block, which is uncommon. Malignant is the most difficult thing that we are scared of, and suprachoroidal hemorrhage, as I said, is rare. It is expected in the first 3 days, and expected IOP in the AC if the AC is shallow. If it is due to leak, the IOP will certainly be less than 6. So a normal IOP of 13, 14, 15 may also be a malignant glaucoma. And this also is known as ciliary block glaucoma and is more likely in cases of chronic angle glaucoma when there is no patent PI. If one eye has suffered from this, then the other eye is likely to have the same problem, and preventive measures may be required. And the treatment for this is mainly cycloplegics, which may be required lifelong following this complication. And reform AC if there is no in 3 to 4 days, and the treatment can be by lasers, or further treatment can be by surgical. Here basically you have to break the anterior face of the vitreous by various means, whatever means are available, and the aqueous pockets may be visible ultrasound but usually are not. So this is a case of ciliary block glaucoma post cataract. I don't have a picture post trabeculectomy, and this is a very, very shallow AC, as you can see, which has become all right with anterior laser hyalodot-P. Thus, to summarize, post of flat AC is a serious complication of incisional surgery for glaucoma. Mostly one of the 4 reasons are there, and IOP decides whether it is malignant glaucoma or otherwise. Most cases can be managed conservatively. Iridolenticular cataract is a surgical emergency. This is contact. Although YLC, that is capsulotomy with anterior face, may help in pseudo fakes, the vitrectomy may be required for malignant glaucoma. Eyes with malignant glaucoma may require lifelong atropine, and the fellow eye needs to be taken care of. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you, Dr. Parul and AIS.
Thank you, Dr. Manavdeep, for covering the topic so nicely. And now we have with us Dr. Mayuri Khamar. Dr. Mayuri Khamar is a very senior glaucoma specialist practicing for last 35 years. She was earlier the head of the department at AMNJ RIU Ahmedabad, and she now heads the Occura Eye and Research Center. She has received many awards and is a well-known figure in the field of glaucoma countrywide. And today she's going to talk about how do we manage the overfiltering and the overhanging blebs. Dr. Mayuri, you can start.
Thank you, Farrell, for giving me this opportunity. I am giving this topic on the leak, managing the leaking and the overhanging blebs. So I will have 3-4 cases and how I manage those. This is a 39-year male patient who had a primary open-angle glaucoma and had left eye trabeculectomy with mitomycin done. On day 1, everything was fine. The IOP was 7 mm of mercury, Siddle's negative, wound okay, well-formed chamber, and this is what you want. On 5th day, he came with the discomfort, and when we saw the slit lamp, there were some pigment dusting on the endothelium with cells and flare 2+, and the bleb was diffused but not elevated now, and the wound appeared to be okay to us. So what to do? On Siddle's, we found out that there was a leaky area in the bleb, and this small hole was there, which was lying exactly on the area of the internal flap. So what to do in such cases? B scan was done for this patient. It was normal and no choroidal detachment was seen. So option available was to control the inflammation, use patch or place the BCL or repair the wound. What we did, we placed the BCL 14.5 mm diameter, which was covering the hole very well, and asked patient to come for the follow-up. The same anti-inflammatory medication with cyclopentolate was given to him. On day 3, you can see the decrease in the size of the buttonhole, and he was comfortable, fine. And on 5th day, the leaking disappeared, the hole also disappeared. So everything was quiet. So the message here is a conservative management can help you in many of the cases. So simple banded lens has prevented the further complication in this case. 2, young myope who had steroid-induced glaucoma and opted for the surgery because he was on maximum medication with lifestyle issues. And after surgery, here also he was operated elsewhere, 200 microgram with 2 minutes. So for myopic eye, we know that this could be a higher dose. Patient came with a huge cystic bleb. Siddle's was negative. And it was a overfiltering blab and having a choroidal detachment that you can see even on the E-scan. So what we opted here is to again go for all conservative treatment fields. So we placed the tight 9-0 nylon non-absorbable horizontal compression suture at the limbus to tamponade the conjunctival incision to prevent the oozing and facilitate the healing process. This is how the post-operatively he looked like, and he did fine post-operatively. At the end of 3 months, everything was good. So this is a small clip to show this another patient how a compression suture can be taken. You can start from the corneal side or you can start with the horizontal. So it's just a cross. Pass the suture, partial thickness, and then again pass it just posterior to the blab. And tighten it properly and see that the blab is getting compressed, and bury the knot by rotating the suture inside. So it's very simple technique, but works in many of the cases. Now the next in the line is overhanging blab, overfiltering blab. It is well documented complication of the trabeculectomy, especially when we are using the antimetabolites. And it is also seen more with the full thickness surgeries and may result from the continuous effect of the continuous lead movement. And the symptoms are because of the huge blab, hypotony is there could be a sweating blab, and there is a dysesthesia due to interference with the lead functions. And acceptable, it is not cosmetically acceptable, and astigmatism. But we all are usually reluctant to relieve these symptoms through additional surgery if IOP is under control. Now, usually it descends on the cornea, gradually it spreads on the cornea, and this forms the drying and Dallen formation, and that also leads to the discomfort to the patient. Conservative management are lubrications or laser treatment or cryo application or the acid application. But all these modalities tend to shrink the blab gradually, and many patients do not require further intervention. But we have to remember whatever procedure, either conservative or the medical surgical treatment that you opt for, this may compromise the blab function. So excellent patient counseling has to be done when you plan the surgical revision of this blab. And this is indicated in all advanced cases or patient who has an intractable pain or the Dallen's giving him problem, or there is a fluctuating. And these are the options one can use. Simply what you can do is partially separate the overhanging conjunctival flap using the spatula or simple braid. Just scrap the overhanging part of the blab. Usually it is not attached to the cornea, easily can be separated. Bring it up to the limbus and just snip it off, because this is the non-functioning part of the blab. But remember that when you remove this, there is some area of the exposure of the cornea as well as the conjunctiva. Now we have used the mitomycin in the previous surgery. So there is a chance that there is a delay in the healing of this area. Another patient, again high myope, who had bilateral cataract surgery done, and the trap was done 10 years back, enhanced with the mitomycin C. You can see the one eye thin cystic overfiltering blabs here as well as here. Now, lately he started complaining of fluctuating vision in the right eye. Advanced disc cupping was there, and huge thin cystic blab with a spontaneous leak which heals on its own. And this happened 3 times before. He was referred to us for that. And you can see on the ASOCT, there is a thin layer which heals on its own, and again it ruptures when the blab forms. So this is what we did. The conjunctival advancement of the blab was done. 3 months post-op is shown. Very small video is here. I will just fast forward it. First, you have to separate out the, see the mobility of the conjunctiva and dissect it away from the blab. I'm trying to preserve this blab. And pull the conjunctiva down. Now try to avoid the cauterization as much as you can, and then apply the non-absorbable sutures 80 or the 90 nylon, and this will help in preserving the bleb by doing the hooding of this. And last patient, a very old filter, but you can see the scleral melt underneath the black. And here what we did, again we separated the conjunctiva from the bleb, but this bleb was not a healthy conjunctiva. So we removed the conjunctiva, last slide, that remove the conjunctiva and put this donor scleral patch graft and fixated it and covered it nicely with the suture. So here we have a compromise of the bleb, and this is post-op outcome of that patient. So what is the take home? Bleb function is compromised and you have to counsel the patient, which is must in all these revisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for a wonderful talk and very nicely illustrated cases. We'll move on to the next talk by Dr. Vibhuti Sinha. Dr. Vibhuti Sinha is my dear friend and my MBBS batchmate. He is currently heading the RIO IGMIS Patna. He's one of the youngest HOD in the country, and he has many awards to his credit and is also actively involved in research. Today, he will be presenting about how do we prevent happening of the wipeout phenomenon. Dr. Vibhuti.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Parul, for giving me this opportunity. And let me congratulate you, all the previous speakers who have covered this, all the complications very nicely. So that made my task very easy. So I'll be talking on wiping out the wipeout, tips for the prevention. So most of these complications, which we have already talked about, they are the precursors of development of this snuff syndrome or the wipeout phenomena developing in a grade stage 5 or a stage 4 glaucoma patients who require trabeculectomy. This is defined as a permanent early postoperative irreversible reduction of visual acuity to less than 20/200 or to counting finger, or less if preoperative visual acuity was less than 20/200 with no apparent ocular pathology. So no apparent ocular pathology has to be defined. So end stage 5 and 4 has to be defined, and these are the patients who are at risk of developing a snuff phenomena or the wipeout phenomena in if we do trabeculectomy. So that is a kind of a scary situation, but still we do attend this kind of patient who are coming to our OPD since glaucoma is still one of the poorly managed disease in ophthalmology. And most of the patients turn up to a glaucoma specialist very late when everything is lost nearly. So still we have to work for that. So incidence, most of the studies till date are retrospective. The incidence of wipeout phenomena has now decreased, but because of improved investigatory procedures and a more meticulous approach to the surgery, the incidence is now very less. So if we go to the articles which are available, most of them are actually retrospective studies. The Indian studies has got reported about 7.7% of the wipeout phenomena in a small case series of 26, with the largest case series of Costa et al., which is of 508 case, and which says approximately 0.95. So approximately less than 1% is the chances of occurrence of this wipeout phenomena if we don't take the complications, intraoperative as well as the post-operative complications seriously in these patients who are at risk of developing wipeout phenomena. So what are the risk factors? Old age with high preoperative IOP, preoperative split fixation on the visual field. So remember, we have to do 10-2 field evaluation if possible before we take up these patients for trabeculectomy. Choroidal effusion during the operative or intraoperative, the post-operative phase, retrobulbar and the peribulbar anesthesia, and undiagnosed high IOP or severe hypotony in the post-surgical stage is one of the risk factor. Now, coming to the local anesthesia, peribulbar, retrobulbar or subtenon anesthesia, usually subtenon is preferred one. Retrobulbar is absolutely known nowadays since it causes direct trauma and pressure on the nerve. localized pressure to the optic nerve due to the retrobulbar hematoma or hematoma within the optic nerve sheath can lead to further damage to the optic nerve. And the volume of anesthesia, if it is trapped, it can further cause a compartmental syndrome, and so the compression and leading to the further damage to the whatever is left with the patient. Adrenaline is another culprit in this scenario, which can cause vasoconstriction and leading to ischemia and decreased visual acuity. And there are a few cases which is reported with the hyaluronidase also. So coming to the pressure spike, early in the severe rise in the pressure can be seen in the post-operative period. And that is the time when usually we do pad and bandage of these patients and call the patient on the next post-operative day. And sometimes we do miss this early spike of the pressure. If the scleral flap is sutured tightly, fistula is blocked with the iris tissue or the blood, or visco is left into the anterior chamber, these are the patients who should be monitored in the post-operative phase for early post-operative rise of the pressure. Or if the patient complains of pain or severe pain or throbbing pain with the vomiting, these patients, the bandage should be opened up, and then these patients should be evaluated for early rise of the pressure also. So coming to the intraoperative hypotony, it is associated with the occurrence of sudden intraoperative ocular hypotony during the glaucoma surgery, as mentioned clearly, very precisely by Dr. J.C. Das and also by Parul, that this hypotony has to be avoided at any cost, since these hypotony can be precursor of many complications. This may result in the optic nerve hemorrhage and decreased perfusion to an already compromised optic nerve blood supply, and it may also induce microembolic episodes that could damage the remaining nerve fibers. So post-operative hypotony with a choroidal effusion is also an independent risk factor for the unexplained visual loss in TVT studies. So how to prevent that? Anterior chamber maintenance can be placed, or repeated injection of the BSS or putting the viscoelastic agent into the anterior chamber can prevent the early hypotony and flattening of the anterior chamber, and that has to be reformed once the surgery is over. Then the viscoelastic has to be replaced with the BSS, and then anterior chamber need to be refilled and reformed. Again, we can use releasable sutures, as mentioned by Dr. Parul. Releasable suture can be planned in all of the surgeries. In my practice, I do put at least one releasable suture in most of the cases, and then they have to be modified and removed in the early post-operative phase to attain the target IOP. Timing of release of releasable suture is of paramount importance. So these are some of the cases which are at risk. The split fixation need to be seen very precisely in the pre-operative phase to actually mark out, and then we need to actually counsel the patient that this can be an outcome of surgery. However, the chances of occurrence is very less. So pre-operative evaluation, a complete evaluation need to be done in these high-risk patients, and more so the documentation need to be complete, since these are the patients who can land up into legal trouble also. So patient presentation can be unexplained decreased visual acuity more than 2 lines on the Snellen charts, and duration can be first week 2 post-operative and persisted for 3 months. In the post-operative periods, as I mentioned, these patients need to be seen early on also. If these patients complain of pain or vomiting in the early post-operative phase for the high IOP, and then most likely if that doesn't occur, then on the first post-operative day, everything need to be carefully evaluated, starting from the conjunctiva, the wounds, the leaky wounds from the to the bleb, and to the anterior chamber and the posterior chamber as well. The visual acuity and IOP has to be measured and to be evaluated at all the visits, and the visual assessment to be done. So to do things are to note any early undiagnosed post-operative IOP spikes should be monitored and should be very carefully monitored. Controlled IOP pre-operatively also. Use of subtenon anesthesia is, or the subconjunctival or intracameral injection is preferred one. Avoid use of adrenaline in anesthesia, and more so when one is placing a retrobulbar or a peribulbar anesthesia. Use of antimetabolite to reduce the scarring. Use of AC maintainer. Scleral flap should be thick to permit the closure without excessive flow. Application of the releasable suture is a must nowadays. NPDS can be an alternative, since it allows no hypotony in the early postoperative phase, and the flat anterior chamber can be avoided in such cases. So, and it can be done, but however, it requires little more expertise to be performed, and that very few surgeons are performing till now. So take-home messages: wipeout phenomena is rare, yet possible consequence of glaucoma surgery in advanced cases. One need to be very careful. Close observation in the post-operative period and proper counseling in the pre-operative period is also essential. These are my references. Thank you very much, and thank you, Parul, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Vibhuti, for covering this rare topic and uncommon occurrence very nicely. I don't think we have Dr. Sagarika with us. I've been trying to contact her. She is not picking up her phone. I think she had talk in another session. So we'll have her talk, present her talk whenever she joins in. Meanwhile, we can have some good discussion with Dr. J.C. Das and all these stalwarts of glaucoma in this session. So I think let's begin from the last talk only. Dr. Vibhuti, he very nicely presented, sir. I think I would take Dr. J.C. Das's opinion that, sir, how frequently have you encountered snuff out phenomenon in your practice in advanced glaucoma cases? So you're on mute, sir.
Yeah, audible now?
Yeah.
And in fact, as Dr. Vibhuti has said, it's very rare, very, very rare. In my 47 years of practice, I've hardly ever seen the phenomenon. Maybe very early days, maybe one or two when I was in All India Institute, but otherwise I have not seen. Maybe that we are taking enough precautions preoperatively, during operation, and immediate postoperative period. Only one or 2 points I will add to Dr. Vibhuti's talk is that two important things, that hypotony and high pressure, either preoperatively, on the table, and postoperatively. And to avoid the hypotony, I said that we have to do that. Plus, in case you have to maintain the antechamber, inject air and see that the titration is absolutely flawless on the table. That can avoid high pressure or low pressure postoperatively. But in such cases, you must see the patient immediately few hours after the surgery. You don't allow the patient to go home. Sometimes you discharge the patient after the surgery, but in such patients, you must keep them, especially when the patient is one-eyed, that is almost the region that you must be extra careful. So you admit the patient, observe, take out the bandage if you have applied the bandage, and check the pressure, eye pressure, even with the NCT, and see that the pressure is not high and the pressure is not that low. In case you feel it is low, no hesitation to put another suture on the table immediately, maybe after a few hours. Or if it is high, take care that the high pressure is controlled immediately. So apart from that, I think Dr. Vibhuti has very thoroughly covered all the aspects.
I think this brings up very important thing that, many a times we hesitate from operating these patients who have a very small field left and who have, split fixations. So because the incidence of snuff out is very, very low, we should still think of going ahead and operating these patients with a properly informed consent rather than hesitating from operating and letting them lose their vision. Dr. Manavdeep, you would like to add anything on this?
I don't think I have anything else to add because this is quite an uncommon thing, but we have to be, because see, especially these patients are very advanced glaucomas, and if they have only, this is the only hope. If we are operating, then there's a hope, there's a huge hope that now the vision will be retained for long. And most of these patients are one-eyed. So in case they lose this, then they become totally blind. So once the risk is so high, we have to take all the precautions. Even if it is rare, we should not take it as rare, because for the person for whom this is happening, that person will go from blind. That person will become totally dependent on somebody else in life. So this is very, very important to take all the precautions in the patients with advanced glaucomatous defects and with split fixation.
Thank you, Dr. Manavdeep. Dr. Mayuri, I just wanted to have your opinion from your experience that, in order to avoid the cases that you showed that the myopes had very thin and overhanging blebs with the use of mitomycin C. So what is your take? I mean, in a myope who has primary glaucoma, would you go in for an anti-metabolite agent, or would you like to go in for something else?
In myope patient, I don't use mitomycin C because the chances of hypotony, even young patient, chances of hypotony is much, much higher compared to the others. And there I use Ologen implants. It works good in my hand and gives excellent result. Regarding the wipeout, I have seen only one wipeout in my whole career of these 35 years. It was a case of advanced diabetic retinopathy. Laser was also done. PDR was there, and he was managed nicely with the retina guy. And the disc was one-eyed patient, almost compromised disc, very pale. So when we did the surgery, day one, he had a vision. 2 lines he could read, and he was very happy. After 3 days, he came back. Pressure was on a lower side, 6 millimeter of mercury, but no PL. So I sent it to my retina colleague, and it was found out that it was the diabetic optic neuropathy that has led to the loss of vision. But still, I am not convinced. Something went wrong with the compromised eye. So one has to do a lot of counseling before you take such patients for the surgery. And precautions, prophylaxis is much more. I do use injection mannitol pre-operatively in this kind of patients after taking physician's consent. And it works for me. I don't allow the fast egression of the aqueous, no collapse of the chamber when we open up. The paracentesis works fantastic in this case. Slow egression do prevent the wipeouts in these patients. And meticulous wound closure. People are in so hurry, just they close it. So on table also with the fluorescein strip, you check that there is no leak anywhere. That is my suggestions.
I think we'll move on to the next question. Dr. Manavdeep nicely covered the topic, but would you like to give any tips for preventing the shallow anterior chamber? What are the intraoperative tips that one can, bring them in the practice to prevent a postoperative shallow anterior chamber?
Intraoperatively, the AC should not become flat even for 2 seconds. That's very, very important. The moment if you should always have some syringes ready with visco, with air, that in case it becomes shallow, suppose sister is taking some time to give you a suture, push in something inside the AC and do not let it become flat. And after that, this is for the overfiltration. This is for prevention of choroidal detachment. And second, of course, is the meticulous conjunctival suturing, which is very, very important to prevent leak. And in case there is a button holing, don't imagine that it will heal automatically. It's very small, it will heal by tomorrow. Do the suture right then and there. And as Dr. Mayuri said, I always do fluorescein staining, titrate the patient again and again. I titrate the patient 2, 3, 4 times. I titrate the patient, and I ensure that there is absolutely no leakage. And fluorescein is also done 2, 3 times. If there is a slightest of doubt, I keep on managing it operatively rather than facing the music next day.
Dr. Vibhuti, you would like to share any ideas? Like if you do a tight, releasable suture or a tight wound suturing for the scleral flaps. So what is your take, approach to removing those sutures so that you avoid flat or shallow AC immediately, if you remove the suture and you have shallowing of the anterior chamber. So how do you manage your releasable
before I go to your question, one point I want to mention that we should use a speculum which doesn't put pressure on the globe to avoid anterior chamber in the intraoperative period. That is one part which we have seen many a times, putting pressure over the globe and creating a egress of fluid, anterior chamber fluid, and leading to flattening of the chamber. Coming to the releasable suture, usually my preferred technique is single suture, single releasable suture, and that I usually titrate from 3 days to 7 days, depending on the intraocular pressure which I have received in the post-operative period. So if the pressure is on the higher side, like 14 or 15 or 16 millimeter of HG in the early phase and the bleb is not forming. So maybe I'll be going for a release of sutures in the early post-operative phase. But anything which is IOP somewhere around 10 millimeter of HG or less than that, and with shallow side of anterior chamber, I usually prefer to keep the releasable suture for few more days rather than to be on the earlier side. So that is my way of releasing.
Thank you, Dr. Shamila. Would you like to add upon? Do you use releasable sutures, and what is your protocol for releasing sutures in your post-operative trabeculectomies?
Yes, thank you. It was an excellent talk about hypotony and its avoidance and wipeout avoidance. Yes, I think that I used to use 2 releasables back in the UK, but now over here I just use 1 releasable, 1 fixed. And in terms of when to remove it, it's guided by massage of the bleb. If you massage the bleb and it suddenly fills up, it's removing it at that stage might be too early. So there has to be some kind of resistance there for you to remove it. But as soon as it's going up, it can be worthwhile preempting the appearance of what the bleb is going to do. And if it looks like it's going to scar up, then you can remove it a little bit earlier.
Dr. Das, as Dr. Mayuri was mentioning that she avoids mitomycin in myopes, what is your take about the amniotic membrane usage in such patients in the high myopes? What is the preferred adjuvant that you would like?
Yes, you should avoid mitomycin C, especially in the higher strength, because it also causes suprachoroidal effusion. And suprachoroidal effusion will invariably give rise to the choroidal effusion, and choroidal effusion will lead to the malignant glaucoma. So it should be avoided as much as possible. But amniotic membrane is another substitute. You can give it very safely. And usually I don't use Ologen as Dr. Mayuri uses it, but I have been using Ologen for a long time. But I was not very satisfied that Ologen is really working. And in fact, in some cases, the fibrosis is so much that I thought I should have avoided it. So that's why nowadays I'm not using Ologen anymore. But amniotic membrane is a good choice, and one can use it very safely. You can use the dry amniotic membrane. Wet amniotic membranes are also available, and wet amniotic membranes are preferable because you can spread it very easily, and it gets absorbed maybe in 3-4 weeks time. So I think amniotic membrane you can use very safely and with confidence.
Dr. Parul, can I say a word about the releasable sutures?
Yes.
There are 2-3 things which are almost, I can say, dictums in releasable sutures. First is never remove a releasable suture in first 3 days. Second is never release 2 releasable sutures on the same day. And thirdly, releasable sutures to be removed when the pressure has increasing pressure has reached a pressure of 10. So 10 is the benchmark when you should remove the suture. So these are the 3 things which I follow in my practice.
And what is the general opinion about teaching the patient about doing a digital massage? How do we teach, and how frequently do you tell them, and what after how many days you start them to you tell them to start the digital massage themselves, and for how long do they continue?
See, I mostly avoid digital massage by the patients. I would prefer to release a suture, and if there's a fixed suture, I would prefer to do the organ suturolysis rather than telling the patient to do massage, which I reserve only for very, educated families. And I tell the relative of the patient to do the massage. I treat the patient, I show them the procedure. I exactly titrate how much they are giving pressure. I hold the finger of the relative and see how the pressure is being given. And only when I'm fully convinced that this can be advised, only then I advise the home massage, because I'm really, really scary about this.
Parul, can I have the releasable sutures? So normally I don't put releasable sutures in all patients. That is one thing. Second, where do I expect in the vulnerable cases where you expect the intraocular pressure to be very high postoperatively, or expulsive hemorrhage is a possibility, then I use releasable sutures. But I have made it a point that releasable sutures should be removed within the first week, 10 days maximum. After that, even if you remove the releasable, nothing is going to happen. So to get rid of that thing, I have started using not releasable sutures, adjustable sutures. Adjustable suture means I pass suture in the edge of the sclera. But one suture, you bring it to the other side, and another suture on this margin, bring it to the other side. And as the pressure starts increasing, maybe after the 7 days to 10 days, I pull from one side and pull from this side. So the flap is lifted. And till I'm satisfied that I'm not causing hypotony and the pressure is under control. So you can pull it from both the sides, gradually one from this side, one from this side, and gradually lift the flap from this side, lift the flap from this side. And that works well. But I think my experience on that is not very good. I've just started it a year back or so, and I find it is working well, rather than a simple releasable suture which is pushed in the cornea, and you remove it after 10 days, the suture comes out, nothing happens. Because by the time the wound healing is so tight that you expect the intraocular pressure to be high only after 2 to 3 weeks, not before that normally. So after 3 weeks, the releasable suture has no role. Even if you remove it after 2 weeks, you just remove the suture, nothing happens. The suture might break also sometimes in the cornea.
I think we did not have Dr. Sagarika, but she had an important topic to be covered. I would like Dr. Vinita, maybe your opinion that what is your take on the failing blebs? How do you manage a patient? I mean, if you have a operated trab, which is say 6 months old and suddenly pressures start to rise, what is the thing that you would like to do? You think about needling, or you think about, how do you, what is your approach towards such patients?
Yeah, see, as regards to failing blebs, as is already seen, like it's better to prevent that stage. So we should try to use the maximum techniques by which we can enhance the success of filtration or the blebs. So initially, especially all these patients are on long-term use of anti-glaucoma medications. So what I do is I usually start them with the low-dose steroids before. Maybe if I have a planned surgery, I'm planning a surgery, and obviously we are planning these surgeries well in advance. Maybe unless until it's an emergency measure for a one-eyed person or something like that. I usually start them in low-dose potency steroids for at least 2 weeks prior to the surgery. So, and take them off, especially the alpha agonist group of drugs, if they are on that, because that is known to cause more chances of failure and leading to more fibrosis of the blebs. So that is one thing which I do. And as regards to when it has started, initially it was functional in the post-operative period, and over the time period, the bleb has started failing. So I'll first need to assess what is the cause of failure. Is it just because of scarring? If it's an HH scarring, and nowadays with the OCT being there with us, we can see the level of scarring. So based on the level of scarring, we can assess whether a needling, at what level of needling, and with just a plain needling or with the use of anti-metabolites, would it help? So I go in that approach. I do an OCT and then assess.
Dr. Mayuri, what is your take on the needling? I mean, how do you take a call that which patients will most probably going to benefit with needling, with antimitotic agent injection and all?
I'm not a big fan of needling because only 25% or maybe 30% of my patient had a advantage after doing the needling. So I will rather wait. We'll put them on the anti-glaucoma medication, and it required after 3 months or 6 months, when everything is quiet, I do the tube. I don't do needling much because it's not working for me.
Dr. Mayuri, I'll just like to say it works not very late in the course of the failure. It works early. Like if you recognize the failure early, then only it will work. It will not work when extensive fibrosis has taken place, especially at the scleral level. If it's just a subconjunctival initial, that's why I said OCT has a big role. So if you're seeing a lot of fibrosis, it will not work.
I use a lot of OCTs. I have published papers also and got award for my work on the bleb morphology using the anti-segment OCT. So releasable suture, after you release the suture, immediately you can see the bleb morphology changes. The multiple aqueous pockets forms, multiple internal layers are seen. So maybe releasable suture is working good for me. It may not be good for.
And how many days after the surgery you remove it?
Releasable, when there is when I see the trend of increasing in intraocular pressure, I immediately.
How many days roughly post-operatively?
Within the 2 to 3 weeks of the surgery. Afterward, if there is a failure, Then
I think that the time is up, sir.
but we can ask Dr. Shamira. He can share his opinion also on this.
I think, ma'am, we are running short of time.
But
They are
we
telling
can
us-
have 2 more minutes. We started late.
Thank you. I'm a big fan of needling, and I used to use BioFew back in the UK, but over here I've moved to MMC in our highly scarring Chinese population.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, all the panelists, Professor Das, Dr. Mayuri, Dr. Vibhuti, Dr. Vanita, Dr. Shamira, and Dr. Manavdeep. And thank you, Zubi, for handling our session nicely. And I think we are well in time, and we are handling you over the...
And we are not really getting late because there is no next session.
Oh, so there is no next
Okay.
session. so
This
we
is
should
the
have
last session. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
For the
Okay.
day.
Zubi
Thank
is
you,
very
Dr. Parul.
I felt that in the previous session also.
We can have some more discussion if anybody's keen.
No. Thank you.
Thank you, Parul.
Thank you
Thank
so
you, Dr.
much.
Parul. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Parul.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
so
Dr.
much
Parul.
for enlightening us. The session was absolutely smooth and wonderful. Thank you so much.